Very good. Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I welcome you one and all to the lecture on experimental epidemiology. In the last class, I was discussing with you regarding the various steps of a randomized controlled trial with various examples. And in the randomized controlled trials, if you recap, if you recall, there are various steps in that, drawing up of the protocol. Then we have the selecting the experimental population and selecting the reference population and the experimental population. Then you have manipulation, follow-up, and assessment of outcome. So these are the various steps of randomized controlled trial. And randomized controlled trial, basically the epidemiological study designs are of two types. Concurrent parallel type of study design and a crossover type of study design. And I have explained you in the previous lecture class about in a diagrammatic way what is meant by concurrent parallel type of study design and what is crossover type of study design. In continuation to that randomized controlled trial, today I will be discussing with you the various examples of randomized controlled trials. So the types of randomized controlled trials are clinical trials, preventive trials, risk factor trials, cessation experiments, trial of etiological agents, and evaluation of health services. These are the various types. Just before that, I told you the different types of study designs of randomized controlled trials, where you have to quote that is concurrent parallel type of study design and crossover type of study design. There are different types of study designs. One of the different types of randomized controlled trials are, these are like clinical trials, preventive trials, risk factor trials, cessation experiments, trial of etiological agents, and evaluation of health services. Clinical trials are basically evaluation of therapeutic agents or drugs, which is done, and there are many good examples related to clinical trials, and the various examples that are cited here are evaluation of beta blockers in reducing cardiovascular mortality in patients surviving the acute phase of myocardial infarction. So you know the role of beta blockers, how would they help in reducing the cardiovascular deaths due to cardiovascular events. So next is the trials of folate treatment or supplementation before conception to prevent occurrence of neural tube defects. Because of this clinical trial, we are now giving iron and folic acid starting from the second trimester, where we give the iron and folic acid for the simple reason to prevent neural tube defects in the pregnant woman, neural tube defects to the baby born to the pregnant woman. Next is the trials of aspirin on cardiovascular mortality and beta carotene and cancer incidence. So aspirin is also proved to reduce cardiovascular mortality, and many a times aspirin drug is prescribed to cardiovascular patients for the simple reason of thinning the blood so that no clots do occur, and also beta carotene on cancer incidence. So consumption of beta carotene rich fruits or vegetables, or for the matter of fact any food which will help in reduction of the incidence of cancer. Likewise, the efficacy of tonsillectomy for recurrent throat infection. A person suffering from recurrent throat infection, tonsillectomy proves as an efficient boon, and this was done by clinical trials. Randomized controlled trials of coronary bypass surgery for the prevention of myocardial infarction. So coronary bypass surgery helps in the prevention of myocardial infarction, and this has proved to be a boon for people suffering from myocardial infarction and preventing them from experiencing mortality or death. The next important is preventive trials. Preventive trials are usually substances or things that are given to prevent a particular disease, and mostly they involve vaccines and chemotherapeutic drugs. So examples are trials of vaccines. In 1946, the Medical Research Council of UK, that is United Kingdom, conducted an extensive trial to test whooping cough vaccine from 3 manufacturers in 10 separate field trials. So what they did is they gave vaccine to experimental group and control group, and in the period what they found was the attack rate of DPT was less in children who were given the whooping cough vaccine compared to the attack rate in children who are not given the whooping cough vaccine. So as a result, what they found, that whooping cough vaccine in fact helps in the reduction of or prevention of whooping cough. Likewise, the trial of chemotherapeutic drugs. So the role of chemotherapeutic drugs also in reducing the malignancy or furthering the malignancy was also found in preventive trials. The next important type of randomized controlled trial is risk factor trials. Risk factor trial is another type of preventive trials. These are usually applied so that the risk factors that are found in a disease, if they are reduced or prevented, they can prevent the particular disease. So risk factor trials can be a single factor trial or a multi-factor trials. And mind you, both these approaches are complementary and both are needed. I can give you an example. If you know coronary heart disease, the risk factors of coronary heart disease or coronary disease will be like elevated serum cholesterol, smoking, hypertension, and sedentary habits. So all these are risk factors for coronary heart disease. If the risk factor of increased serum cholesterol is mitigated or brought down, then the incidence of coronary heart disease will come down. Likewise, if there is a cessation of smoking, likewise, if there is control of hypertension or treatment of hypertension, and if at all there is lifestyle modification like doing exercise, all these are nothing but risk factor trials which can help in reducing the incidence of coronary heart disease. The famous examples that are cited below are WHO trial on primary prevention of coronary heart disease using clofebrate to reduce serum cholesterol. So this is a very important drug, clofebrate, which was used to control serum cholesterol and which has helped in the prevention of coronary heart disease. Likewise, the Stanford 3 community study, the North Karelia project in Finland, the Oslo study, and the multiple risk factor intervention trial in US. All these are risk factor trials because the various risk factors that are involved in the disease are dealt in this particular risk factor trials. So any disease you identify, and you identify what are the various risk factors, and you do anything to reduce the risk factors in them, thereby preventing the disease and bringing down the morbidity due to the particular disease. Next is cessation experiments. Cessation experiments are again a type of preventive trials which are often used to stop a particular risk factor or curtail a risk factor so further disease will not occur. So in smoking and lung cancer, we have seen that it is divided automatically into smokers and non-smokers. And if you reduce the incidence of smoking in smokers, you find that definitely there is a decrease in the causation of lung cancers in smokers compared to that of non-smokers. Likewise also, a large randomized control trial to study the role of smoking cessation in the primary prevention of coronary heart disease. So a large, another example is a large randomized control trial. So if smoking cessation is done in the experimental group and smoking is allowed in the control group, so basically you take smokers and you divide them into experimental group and control group. In smokers group, you reduce the incidence of smoking or you stop smoking in the experimental group, and in the control group, you allow the smokers to smoke. Then you find that the incidence of coronary heart disease is less in smokers who have curtailed smoking compared to that of those who have not stopped smoking or who are not finished off smoking. Now, trial of etiological agents. Now, experimental epidemiology is meant to confirm or refute an etiological hypothesis. We have studied what is a hypothesis in descriptive epidemiology. We have formulated a hypothesis in descriptive epidemiology. We have tried to prove the support or refute or prove the hypothesis in a case control study, and further we prove the association between the risk factor and outcome as in a typical hypothesis in a cohort study. Now, the randomized control trial is the ultimate as far as the proof of etiological hypothesis is concerned. So here we have to find out whether any etiological agents which are responsible for the causation of a particular disease, if you are able to control them or mitigate them or bring down them, whether they have any effect as far as the causation of disease is concerned. There is a role of oxygen therapy in retrolental fibroplasia. Retrolental fibroplasia is a disease that may occur in premature infants if they are subjected to oxygen therapy. So retrolental fibroplasia may further lead to blindness. So those premature children or those low birth weight children whose weight is less than 1,500 grams, and if they are subjected to oxygen therapy, this may result in retrolental fibroplasia in them, resulting further in blindness. So what they have done is they have assembled a group of, they have gathered a group of premature infants and those weighing less than 1,500 grams, and they divided them into two groups. To one group, they have subjected them to 50% oxygen therapy, and in another group, they have not given any oxygen. The group which was not given any oxygen were also known as curtailed oxygen group. So it was found that those who were not given oxygen, they did not develop retrolental fibroplasia. On the other hand, the group of premature infants or low birth weight infants to whom the oxygen therapy was given, they developed retrolental fibroplasia. As I said, the another curtailed oxygen group, they were not subjected to any oxygen, or the oxygen was restricted to them. But some of the curtailed oxygen group children or premature infants, they were given oxygen on an emergency basis. So those children of curtailed oxygen group to whom the oxygen was given on an emergency basis, they also developed retrolental fibroplasia. So to cut the long story short, the entire thing is, if oxygen is given to premature infants or low birth weight infants, this may result in retrolental fibroplasia in the premature infants and also leading to blindness. So we should understand that oxygen therapy has to be prevented or not given in premature infants. This oxygen retrolental fibroplasia was first found out by T.L. Berry, who was a Boston ophthalmologist way back in 1942. So prior to 1938, the disease of retrolental fibroplasia was not known. It was only because of his efforts that the retrolental fibroplasia came into picture, and they found out that it is due to oxygen therapy in premature infants. The last type of randomized control trial is evaluation of health services. Usually, when health services are given, the health services have to be prioritized according to the resources available, whether in terms of manpower, material, and money. So the prioritization of health services is done, and the services are evaluated whether which service is the best. So for evaluation of health services, to say if a particular national program is working or not, we need to evaluate. So if there are 2-3 national programs for a particular disease, and we evaluate what is the role of those programs in bringing down the particular disease. If we find any one of the program having a very good score, then we choose that particular program. So that is the essence of the meaning of evaluation of health services. So examples are chemotherapy of tuberculosis in India. So it was found that the domiciliary treatment means treatment of tuberculosis in homes or in houses was as effective compared to that of the sanatorium-based treatment or hospital-based treatment. So what they found was treating tuberculosis at home was more cheaper compared to that of hospital treatment or sanatorium-based treatment of tuberculosis. Multiphasic screening was evaluated by an RCT in Southeast London. So all over the world, the multiphase screening was found to have a very good impact. Uh, but when an RCT was developed, was done in Southeast London, it was found that multiphase screening was not that effective. So this led to the government of the day not to allot huge sums of money for a multiphasic screening. So they found that multiphasic screening was not effective for diagnosis of number of diseases. So multiphasic screening was eventually dropped off. Next is healthcare delivery tasks. Traditionally performed by the physicians can also be performed by nurses and other paramedical workers, thus saving physician time. So instead of employing physicians for everything, so many of the small tasks or many of the healthcare delivery tasks can be usually be done by nurses and other paramedical workers, thus saving a lot of physician time who might be otherwise be involved in other controlling of other diseases or treatment of more important diseases. So we have finished randomized controlled trials. Today we are going to discuss about what are non-randomized trials and non-experimental trials. As the name suggests that there is no randomization involved in this particular type of trials, and there is no often what you call control group for this type of trials. Often the control group is not involved, and there is no randomization. We understand randomization is nothing but a statistical procedure whereby the experimental group, subjects of the experimental group are divided into again the study group and the control groups, or experimental group and control group by means of a statistical table called the random number table. It can be by other methods also. So randomization is basically a statistical process so that we avoid something called a selection bias. So here in non-randomized trials and non-experimental trials, there is no thing such as randomization. Although the experiment method is always to be preferred, it is not always possible for ethical, administrative, and other reasons to a randomized controlled trial in human beings. Many a times it happens that we cannot do a randomized controlled trial in human beings. For example, we just cannot observe people the role of smoking in causing cancer to them. So what are the various compelling reasons for opting for non-randomized trials? Number one is ethical reason. For example, smoking and lung cancer and induction of cancer by viruses have not lent themselves to direct experimentation in human beings. So as I said earlier, we just cannot allow smoking in a group of people and observe in them lung cancer. So because we don't have any ethical permission for that, and we just cannot allow a person to get disease or having the disease because of smoking. So the ethical reasons we do not allow. For ethical reasons, we have non-randomized trials. Administrative reasons. Some preventive measures can be applied only to a group or a community or on a community-wide basis. So example are community trials of water fluoridation. So water fluoridation is done usually to prevent fluorosis, and usually fluoridation is done, and it is so it is very easy to apply some preventive measure to a community, and we cannot, if it is a RCT, we cannot, we have to divide the community into two groups. So in fact, the whole community requires the intervention. So here, for administrative reason, the entire community is subjected to water fluoridation as for a typical non-randomized trial. Now, prohibitive cost and logistics. Prohibitive cost means incremental cost or increased cost or high cost. And logistics means the various things that are required for it. So when disease frequency is low and the natural history is long, example, cancer cervix, randomized controlled trials require follow-up of thousands of people for a decade or more. As I said, randomized controlled trial requires follow-up of experimental group and control group, and these people have to be followed for 10 years or 15 years or 20 years. If at all we choose something like a disease like cancer cervix. So in cancer cervix, we know that the natural history is very long. So here it requires huge sums of money to maintain both these groups. And some attrition may also result in both these groups. For that reason, the randomized controlled trials are not chosen, and in fact, non-randomized trials are chosen for such thing. Approach in randomized controlled trials is sophisticated, while it is crude in non-randomized trials. As there is no randomization in non-randomized trials, the degree of comparability will be low, and the chance of a spurious result is higher. See, in a non-randomized trial, there is no what you call randomization, and so as a result, we cannot compare the one group with that of the another. So there is chance of spurious result or a false result can be more in a case of a non-randomized trial compared to that of a randomized control trial. The validity of a causal interference remains largely a matter of statistical judgment. So here the causal interference inference, that means the association between the risk factor and outcome, is not due to statistics, it's only simply due to a matter of observation. So statistics is not, the judgment of statistics is not involved in a non-randomized trial. In spite of this, vital decisions affecting public health and preventive medicine are made by non-randomized trials. Types of non-randomized trials. Basically, there are three types of non-randomized trials. They are uncontrolled trials, natural experiments, before and after comparison studies. So the types of non-randomized trials are only three in number. Uncontrolled trials. As the name suggests, there is no control group to study the effect in this type of trials. There is no room for uncontrolled trials, trials with no comparison group. There is room for uncontrolled trials, trials with no comparison group. So here basically the comparison group is absent or not there to study the effect of a particular intervention or a factor. And the classical examples of a pap test for cervical cancer is explained here. There was no randomized control studies of the benefits of the pap test when it was first introduced in 1920. So you know, pap test or Papanicolaou test was used for diagnosis of cervical cancer, or for screening of cervical cancer. So we didn't have any randomized control studies to understand the benefits of the pap test. So the benefits of the pap test were mostly by uncontrolled trials, because when the pap test was first introduced, it was directly done on cervical cancer patients, and the discovery was made. So there was no group to compare whether the pap test was actually effective in diagnosing cervical cancer. So there is no control group when a pap test was first introduced in 1920, and today it still continues to be a very good screening tool when we use it for cervical cancer. Today there is indirect epidemiological evidence from well over a dozen uncontrolled studies of cervical cancer screening that pap test is effective in reducing mortality from this disease. So what we have found is, from a dozen, almost there are 12 uncontrolled studies of cervical cancer screening who say that pap test is effective in reducing mortality from the disease. So when pap test was first introduced, it was directly used in cervical cancer women to see whether the pap test effectively helps in screening of cervical cancer patients. There was no comparison group where the pap test was applied to one group, and for another group the pap test was not applied. So directly it was done, and hence it comes into an uncontrolled trial. And with over a dozen uncontrolled studies, it proved that pap test is very effective in reducing mortality, in screening cervical cancer, and thereby reducing mortality from this disease by timely treatment interventions. Initially, uncontrolled trials may be useful in evaluating whether a specific therapy appears to have any value in a particular disease. to determine an appropriate dose to investigate adverse reactions. So this is the classical example of uncontrolled trials. So likewise, uncontrolled trials were also done by in when to scurvy people, the lemon juice was given, and it was found out that lemon juice, in fact, tried to cure scurvy. So that was also an uncontrolled trial that was done. So there was no group to suggest that all the scurvy patients were given different types of nutrients, and scurvy people, when they were given this this particular lemon juice, they found that it was able to cure scurvy. Likewise, natural experiments. When experimental studies are not possible in human populations, the epidemiologist or the investigator tries to seek or identify natural circumstances that can mimic an experiment. In 1881, there was a, let me explain this by this example. In 1881, there was a huge earthquake in the city of Athens. So Athens is the capital of Greece, and there was a huge earthquake at that time. So in that particular study, what they found among the people, the effect of stress upon the cardiovascular mortality. So this, what they found was this earthquake created a lot of stress, or made the cardiovascular patients subject to a lot of stress because of this particular earthquake. So by this, they proved that stress can actually cause what you call increased mortality in cardiovascular cases. So this is one of the natural experiment where there is no separate group or comparison group to prove that whether stress can actually cause cardiovascular mortality. So stress in the form of an earthquake has helped the researchers or investigators to say whether they have a role in cardiovascular mortality without having any sort of comparison group or in any other group. Likewise, in respect of cigarette smoking, people have separated naturally into two groups, that is smokers and non-smokers. So we are not subjected here into two groups like those who are subjected to smoking and those who are not subjected to smoking. What we can say, by their habit of smoking and non-smoking, they're actually naturally divided into two groups, that is smokers and non-smokers. So effectively, we can study the role of lung cancer or coronary heart disease in this, and this is again a natural experiment. So since it is divided into naturally smokers and non-smokers, we call it as a natural experiment. Had we have divided people into two groups, like experimental group and control group, and one group we allowed people to smoke, and in another group we do not allow people to smoke, then it would have been a sort of a randomized controlled trial. But by the virtue of the habit, of cigarette smoking, people have divided into two groups, that is smokers and non-smokers. Likewise, the migrants with that of the host population or the population of the origin can also help in understanding about the various diseases. Likewise, religious or social groups. Religious or social groups also are a very important source of natural experiments. Many a times, religious groups congregate in fairs, festivals, and we see the incidence of diseases in religious groups or religious or social groups are more compared to that of other people who do not visit any religious or event or any fair or a festival like that. So it is naturally divided into religious or social groups, and another is a normal group. So if you compare, it is found that religious people may have the chance of water pollution or air pollution, and water pollution resulting in a lot of gastroenteric diseases or waterborne diseases. Atomic bombing of Japan. To study the effects of radiation, this atomic bombing of Japan is again another natural experiment. So Japan was not bombed on an experimental basis. It was bombed because Japan tried to attack US and the Pearl Harbor. As a result, in retaliation of the attack of Japanese on the United States of America, the Americans bombed Japan in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So this bombing was done, and this served as a natural experiment to study the effects of radiation because of atomic bombing in people living in those two cities. Likewise, the effects of famines on the morbidity and the mortality of the people, on the socioeconomic status of the people, and what is the socioeconomic impact, what is the health impact, is again but nothing but a natural experiment, and this allows you to understand about the effect of that condition. Similarly, in earthquake and also John Snow's discovery of cholera. So here is a very important example to prove that cholera is a waterborne disease. John Snow, in this particular table, has found out that the people who draw water, who get water from River Thames, from the particular company called Southwark and Vauxhall Company, they have more number of deaths from cholera. That is around 315 per 10,000 houses, compared to water supplied by Lambeth Company, which resulted in deaths of 37 per 10,000 houses. So if you look at the number of deaths from cholera, it was found for Lambeth Co. The water supplied by the Lambeth Company was lesser compared to that of Southwark and Vauxhall Co. Lambeth Company was drawing water at a point upstream, and where there is less chances of pollution or contamination of water supply. Whereas the Southwark and Vauxhall Company were drawing water and supplying water to London from a sewage water basin. As a result, the people who get water from this company, that is Southwark and Vauxhall Co., were having more number of deaths. See, 163 deaths were there due to cholera by this by the water supplied by this company, and this has resulted in 315 per 10,000, 315 deaths per 10,000 houses. So it was found out by this particular natural experiment. He has not conducted any experiment or divided into people getting water into Lambeth Co., and it was naturally divided because these two companies were supplying water. So when he found that there's a difference in the number of death rates, he could prove that water is a very important vehicle, or water is a very important vehicle for transmission of cholera and deaths resulting due to it. And hence he was able to prove that cholera is a waterborne disease. The difference in the occurrence of cholera among these two populations gave clear demonstration that cholera is a waterborne disease. So we have studied uncontrolled trials, natural experiments. The other type of non-randomized trial is before and after comparison studies. These before and after comparison studies are again of two types: before and after comparison studies without control, and before and after comparison studies with control. So before and after comparison without control means they do not use any control in this particular type of studies. These studies center around comparing the incidence of disease before and after the introduction of a preventive measure. So if you want to understand whether a particular intervention is actually beneficial or not, you need to understand, or you need to derive what was the incidence of disease prior to the application of intervention, and what is the incidence of disease after the application of the intervention. It means that each subject or each population serves as its own control. There is no comparison group or control. So the events which took place prior to the use of new treatment or preventive procedure are used as a standard for comparison. So what I said is, so each subject or each population serves as its own experiment and control itself. So so we need to understand what is the incidence of a particular disease prior to the treatment, and what is the incidence of the particular disease or a particular thing after the application of the intervention. Examples are prevention of scurvy among sailors by James Lind in 1750. So before intervention, what was the incidence of scurvy? And after intervention, what was the incidence of scurvy? Was known by the classical experiment of prevention of scurvy among sailors by James Lind. Likewise, studies on transmission of cholera by John Snow in 1854 and prevention of polio by Salk and Sabin vaccines were also one of the before and after comparison studies without control. So what was the incidence of polio before the Salk and Sabin vaccines? And what was the incidence of polio after Salk and Sabin vaccines were introduced? So naturally, the polio was more before Salk and Sabin vaccines were given. Post Salk and Sabin vaccines, when they were administered to children, the incidence of polio has come down. So there is no separate group. So you have to know what was the incidence of disease, and what was the incidence of particular risk factor before the intervention, and what is the incidence of disease or risk factor after the intervention. So in order to establish evidence in before and after comparison studies, the following are needed. Data is required regarding the incidence of a disease before and after the introduction of a preventive measure. So without data, you cannot say whether the intervention has actually brought down the incidence of disease. There should be introduction or manipulation only of only one factor or change relevant to the situation. Other factors remaining the same, as for example, addition of fluorine to drinking water to prevent dental caries. So prior to here, what was the incidence of dental caries before the addition of fluorine to drinking water, and after when you have applied fluorine to drinking water, what is the incidence of dental caries? So you need to find out. Diagnostic criteria of the disease should remain the same. Adoption of preventive measures should be over a wide area. Reduction in incidence must be large following the introduction of the preventive measure because there is no control. Several trials must be needed before the evaluation is considered conclusive. So it's not by a single instance where you can prove that whether this intervention has actually helped in reducing the incidence of the disease or the prevalence of the disease. There should be several trials of that sort to say whether this intervention actually helped. So, and usually the reduction in the incidence of a disease should be good enough to understand whether this preventive measure actually has helped, so that this will help in understanding this type of trials. There is no control involved, we must understand that if there is a substantial reduction in incidence, then this preventive measure is actually good. So all these are required as far as before and after comparison studies without control. Now this is a beautiful example about the adoption of compulsory seatbelt legislation in Victoria, one of the provinces of Australia in 1971. So here is a table which shows before and after comparison study in Victoria, that is Australia, following introduction of seatbelt legislation for prevention of deaths and injuries caused by motor vehicle accidents. You know how seat belts are so important to be put by the people driving the vehicle, as well as the passengers sitting in front as well as behind. So how the seat belt legislation actually helped in the reduction or prevention of deaths and injuries is given by this particular example or table. So seat belt legislation was applied to Victoria, in the province of Victoria in Australia in 1971. So in 1970, prior to the application of seatbelt legislation, the deaths in Victoria were 564. And the injuries prior to the seatbelt legislation were 14,620. After it was applied in 1971, the number of deaths came down from 564 to 464, thus causing a change of 17.7% reduction in the incidence of deaths. Likewise, the number of injuries came down to 12,454 from 14,620 way back in 1970, and this has caused a change of 14.88%. This proves that seatbelt legislation actually helps in reduction of deaths and injuries, and this is before and after comparison studies without any control. We have used only the province of Victoria to understand about the impact of seatbelt legislation. We have not compared Victoria with some other province or some other state. Next is before and after comparison studies with control. In the absence of a control group, the epidemiologist tries to utilize a natural control group which is provided by nature or natural circumstances. Because it is very difficult to get a control group, epidemiologist often tries to pick up a control which is available nearby or by natural circumstances. So if the primitive group is to be applied to the entire community, you would select another community which is similar to that of the previous community, particularly with respect to frequency and characteristics of the disease to be prevented. Results of seatbelt legislation in Victoria, Australia is compared to that of other states in Australia. Other states in Australia form the natural control where seatbelt legislation was not introduced. So what he has done is he has compared the deaths and injuries in Victoria where the seatbelt legislation was enforced compared to other states in Australia where the seatbelt legislation was not enforced. So as I said, before and after comparison studies without control. So in this table, what we see the effect of adoption of compulsory seatbelt legislation in Victoria in 1970 compared to other states where similar legislation was not introduced. So 1970, the number of deaths in Victoria was 564. In other states, it was 1426. And after seatbelt legislation was imposed or promulgated in Victoria, the number of deaths came down to 464. There is a change of 17.7%. And whereas in other states where the seatbelt legislation was not enforced, in fact, there was increase in the number of deaths as seen in this table. There is an increase of 0.2%, which shows that seatbelt legislation is in fact very useful in bringing down the morbidity and the mortality. Likewise, the injuries, what we find is in Victoria, after the seatbelt legislation, it has come down to the extent of 14.8%, whereas in other states, it has increased to an extent of 1% from 39,980 to 40,396, where in other states, the seatbelt legislation was not enforced or not promulgated. So this shows that other states form a sort of natural control compared to that of Victoria, where seatbelt legislation was imposed. In other states, the seatbelt legislation was not enforced. This proves that before and after comparison studies with control helps in understanding about the effect of a legislation, the effect of an intervention, without in fact trying to have a control which is done by randomization. So in this entire process of natural uncontrolled trials, natural experiments, and before and after comparison studies with control and without control, we do not have a process of randomization. Since there is no randomization, we call it as non-randomized trial. As I said earlier in the university examination, randomized controlled trial is very important, and many a times long questions do come on randomized controlled trial where you need to write all the steps and also the flow chart of randomized controlled trial. And also sometimes they may also ask along with the long question, they may put up a question like add a note on the different type of epidemiological designs of a randomized controlled trial, where I said concurrent parallel type of study design or crossover type of study design, like that. And what are the various types of randomized controlled trials? So all this can come as a long question. Sometimes a long question can be what is a non-randomized trial and what are the various types of non-randomized trials. Otherwise, short notes on uncontrolled trials, natural experiments, or before and after comparison studies can also come. So this part of randomized controlled trials and non-randomized trials are very, very important to understand the different types of epidemiological study designs. So we have completed what are the various types of epidemiological study designs. So as I said, epidemiological study designs are divided into basically into observational and experimental. Observational are again divided into descriptive and analytical. Analytical are again divided into two important types, that is case control study and cohort study. Whereas the experimental or interventional studies are divided into randomized controlled trials, field trials, and community studies. Thank you very much for your patient hearing. Please try to read the topic again and again so that you can clear your doubts and you can have an understanding along with this lecture class what I have tried to present before you. Thank you very much.